The warning was impossible to miss. Red letters, stamped across the kennel card at the Lake County Animal Shelter. The kind of red that didn't ask questions or leave room for doubt. Caution. Dangerous dog. The card hung slightly crooked, taped to the chain-link gate, like a verdict that had already been decided. Kennel 14 held a shadow. Rex was 3 years old, a thick-shouldered pit bull, his gray coat dulled by months without sunlight. He pressed himself into the far corner of the concrete run, his back tight against the wall, his body folded inward, as if he were trying to take up less space in a world that clearly didn't want him. His eyes, dark, watchful, never still, followed every movement in the corridor outside his cage. People called that look a menace. They said it with lowered voices, the way folks talk about storms on the horizon. "He's a problem dog," one volunteer whispered to another. "Don't get too close. He growls." Rex didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He didn't throw himself at the gate the way other dogs did when footsteps echoed down the aisle. He simply watched. And when someone crossed the invisible line of his comfort, he trembled and let out a low, broken growl, less a threat than a plea to be left alone. 4 months had passed like that. 4 months of clipboards and crossed-off dates. 4 months of families walking past his kennel, pausing long enough to read the red tag, before shifting their attention to dogs with wagging tails and easy smiles. Rex had learned the rhythm of rejection. Shoes slowed. Eyes flicked to the warning. Steps sped up again. At some point, he stopped standing when people came by. In a shelter like this, overcrowded, underfunded, running on donations and hope, time was a currency no one had enough of. Dogs with issues didn't get the luxury of patience. Dogs labeled dangerous rarely got a second look. The staff didn't say the word out loud, but it hung in the air like winter dampness. Euthanasia. Not punishment. Just policy. Just making space. Tom Alvarez knew all of that when he stopped in front of Kennel 14 after closing hours. Tom was in his late 40s, shoulders still broad from his years in the Marines, movements careful, in the way that came from having seen too much. He didn't flinch at Rex's growl. He crouched a few feet back, resting his forearms on his knees, keeping his voice low and even. "Hey, big guy," he said softly. I know. Rex's eyes locked onto him. His body stayed frozen, muscles tight beneath scarred skin. "They think you're mean," Tom went on, more to himself than to the dog. "Funny thing is, I've seen mean, and that ain't it." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere, a metal door clanged shut, and Rex flinched hard enough that his nails scraped against the concrete. Tom felt it in his chest. Fear like that didn't come from nowhere. He glanced back at the red tag. Dangerous. In his experience, labels were convenient things. They saved people from having to look closer, from having to ask what happened before the warning signs showed up. Tom stood, hesitating before he left. You hang in there, he said quietly. Just a little longer. Rex didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the softness, the way Tom didn't reach for him, didn't stare him down, didn't demand anything in return. When the man finally walked away, Rex turned his face toward the wall again, breathing shallow, waiting for the next sound that might hurt him. Outside, snow had started to fall over Gary, Indiana. Slow, heavy flakes, settling over abandoned factories and empty streets. Winter always made the shelter feel colder, even indoors. And winter made decisions come faster. Behind Rex's kennel, on a clipboard clipped to the office wall, his name sat on a list that grew shorter every week. Time was running out. And Rex had no way of knowing that everything he believed about humans, about danger, about survival, about being alone, was about to be quietly, completely undone. The intake report was only 3 paragraphs long. Male pit bull, approximately 3 years old, found chained in the basement of an abandoned duplex on the south side of town. Dehydrated, underweight, scars consistent with prolonged abuse, displays fear-based defensive behavior, approach with caution. What the report didn't record were the sounds. It didn't mention the way Rex had barked himself hoarse the first night he was brought in. The noise, sharp, panicked, echoing off concrete walls, as if he were calling for someone who never came. It didn't note how, when a hand reached toward him too fast, his whole body recoiled before his mind had time to catch up. It didn't capture the way his heart raced at the clink of metal, or how his eyes followed adults with the vigilance of someone who had learned. That pain often arrived without warning. Fear, for Rex, wasn't an emotion. It was a system. Every sound was measured. Every movement was tracked. Every shadow carried history. Tom learned this in pieces. He worked the early shift, when the shelter was quiet and the dogs were still shaking off sleep. He never opened Rex's kennel. He never pushed his luck. Instead, he cleaned nearby runs slowly, deliberately, letting Rex get used to the rhythm of his presence. Boots on concrete, a broom sliding back and forth, the low murmur of a man talking to himself. "You're safe here," Tom said one morning, not expecting an answer. "I know it doesn't feel that way." Rex pressed deeper into his corner. Some volunteers took the growling personally. "If he bites someone, we're done," one of them said during a staff briefing. "It's a liability." Others nodded. Fear in a dog Rex's size made people nervous. Fear looked like aggression when it came with muscle and teeth. Linda Harris, the shelter director, listened without interrupting. She'd been doing this job for 20 years. She knew how thin the line was between compassion and collapse. Funding depended on public trust. One bad incident could shut them down. "We document everything," she said finally. "If we can't prove he's safe, we can't keep him." Safe. The word followed Rex like a ghost. What did safe even mean? to a dog who had never known it. A week later, a behavior specialist came in to observe him. She didn't carry treats. She didn't make eye contact. She sat on a stool outside the kennel and watched Rex breathe. "He's not preparing to attack," she said quietly after a long silence. "He's preparing to survive. Look at his posture. He's bracing, not advancing." "So he's not aggressive?" Tom asked. "He's terrified," she answered. "And terrified animals do dangerous things when they're cornered." That was the part no one wanted to hear. Rehabilitation was possible, but slow. Months of desensitization. Trust built in inches, not miles. And even then, there were no guarantees. Most families didn't want a project. They wanted a dog who ran toward them, not away. By December, the shelter was full. Winter brought more surrenders. Heating costs went up. Space ran out. Linda stood by the whiteboard in the staff room, tapping a marker against her palm. "We need to make some hard calls," she said. "Rex hasn't shown improvement fast enough." Tom felt his jaw tighten. "He hasn't bitten anyone. Not once." "That's not the standard," Linda replied gently. "The standard is adoptability." The room went quiet. Later that night, after the last visitor had gone, and the halls were dim except for emergency lights, Tom stopped in front of Kennel 14 again. Rex was awake, as always, eyes tracking him from the dark. "I wish you understood English," Tom murmured. "I really do." He crouched down, keeping his distance. "They're saying you're running out of time." Rex's ears flicked. He didn't growl. He didn't move. He just watched. Tom swallowed. "I've seen guys like you before. Not dogs. Men. Scared ones. The kind everyone writes off because they don't smile right." He stood slowly, the weight of the day pressing into his shoulders. "If anyone's gonna see who you really are," he said, "they're gonna have to look past the noise." Rex turned his face toward the wall again, breath shallow, as if bracing for something worse than loneliness. Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere, beyond the shelter doors, a little girl who had learned how to be quiet was about to walk into Rex's line of sight and change the meaning of that silence forever. Winter settled over Gary like a heavy lid. Snow piled up along the curbs outside the shelter, gray with exhaust and grit. And the wind coming off Lake Michigan cut through coats like it had something personal against everyone. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and damp concrete. The dogs felt it. They always did. Cold made everything sharper, sounds louder, nerves tighter, time shorter. The shelter was past capacity. Linda Harris stood at the center of the staff room one Tuesday morning, arms crossed, eyes tired, but steady. A whiteboard behind her listed kennel numbers, names, intake dates. Too many dates stretched too far back. "We're out of room," she said. "We've got 3 emergency intakes coming this week. We don't have the space, and we don't have the funding to keep extending holds indefinitely. No one interrupted her. Everyone already knew which names were circled in red. Rex's name sat there, quiet and damning. We've given him more time than most, Linda continued. And I don't regret that. But he's still not adoptable by our standards. Tom leaned forward in his chair. Define adoptable. Linda met his gaze. Approachable, predictable, safe for the public. Tom shook his head slowly. He's predictable. He's scared. That's not the same thing as dangerous. It is when something goes wrong, she said softly. You know that. The word no one wanted to say hung between them, heavy and unavoidable. Euthanasia wasn't punishment. It was procedure. It was what happened when the math stopped working. Time 200 months. 2 weeks, Linda said at last. We'll give him 2 more weeks. If there's no significant change, no improvement, we have to make a decision. Tom felt his chest tighten. 2 weeks wasn't time. It was a countdown. That evening, long after visiting hours ended, Tom found himself standing in front of Kennel 14 again. Rex was awake. Of course. He always was. Sleep came lightly to dogs who'd learned to listen for danger. Hey, Tom said quietly. You and me, we're on borrowed time. Rex's eyes flicked toward him. His body stayed curled inward, tight against the wall. They say you gotta show something, Tom went on. Some sign you're worth the risk. He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. Funny thing is, you've been showing it all along. Folks just don't know how to read it. A door slammed somewhere down the hall. Rex flinched hard, claws scraping the concrete. His growl came fast and broken, more fear than fury. Tom held up a hand instinctively, palm out, even though Rex wasn't anywhere near him. Easy. You're okay. But Rex wasn't okay. He had learned that words didn't stop pain. Only distance did. Over the next few days, the shelter buzzed with activity. New dogs came in, young ones, friendly ones. Dogs that pressed their noses against the bars, wagged their tails like they were auditioning for love. Families stopped and smiled. Clipboards filled. Leashes changed hands. Rex watched it all from his corner. He watched children laugh at puppies. He watched couples argue softly about size and shedding. He watched hope walk past him, again and again, never slowing down. Tom tried small things. He sat near the kennel during his breaks. He spoke without expectation. He tossed treats, just close enough that Rex could reach them, without stepping forward. Some days Rex ate. Some days he didn't. Progress, if it existed, was invisible to anyone not looking for it. By the end of the first week, Linda updated the board. The red circle around Rex's name grew thicker. Tom stopped her in the hallway. You ever notice how he calms down when things are quiet? He asked. When nobody's staring at him? I've noticed, Linda said. I've also noticed he shuts down when people get close. Because people have been hurting him his whole life, Tom said. That doesn't make him unfixable. Linda sighed. It makes him risky. Risk was a luxury shelters couldn't afford. That night, Tom stood in front of Kennel 14 longer than usual. Rex's breathing was shallow, eyes half-lidded, but alert. You don't know this, Tom said, voice rough. But you're running out of days. Rex didn't move. He didn't need to understand the words, to feel the weight behind them. 2 weeks, Tom whispered. That's all they're giving you. Rex turned his face toward the wall, muscles tight, as if bracing for something he couldn't see coming. Neither of them knew that somewhere across town, a little girl was learning how to make herself small, in a world that felt too loud, that she too was counting days in her own quiet way. And that when those two paths crossed, the countdown would mean something very different. Hannah Miller had learned, early on, how to disappear without leaving the room. She did it the way some kids learned math or spelling, by necessity, by watching adults talk past her, voices tight with things they didn't want to explain, by learning that silence was safer than asking questions that didn't have answers. At 7 years old, she carried her quiet like a habit, hugging her backpack to her chest whenever the world felt too big. Indiana wasn't home. Not really. They'd arrived in Gary 2 months earlier, her mother's car packed with boxes and unspoken grief, pulling away from a house that had grown colder long before they left it. Hannah didn't cry when her parents split. She just nodded, like someone accepting a rule she hadn't written. Her mother, Rachel, worked nights at a grocery store off Broadway, the kind of job that left her tired in her bones and apologetic, without saying the word. That Saturday afternoon, Rachel suggested the animal shelter, almost on impulse. We'll just look, she said, forcing a smile. Might be good to get out of the apartment. The shelter smelled like disinfectant and wet fur. Hannah noticed it immediately. She noticed everything. The echo of footsteps, the metal clatter of kennel doors, the way some dogs barked, like they were trying to convince the world they still mattered. She moved slowly down the aisle, reading name cards in careful, deliberate letters. Max, Daisy, Cooper. Dogs pressed against the gates, tails wagging, eyes bright, with rehearsed hope. Volunteers smiled, offering practiced reassurances. Hannah nodded politely and kept walking. She stopped at Kennel 14, without knowing why. The red tag caught her eye first. Caution. Dangerous dog. The letters were sharp, final, the kind of warning adults trusted, without question. Inside the kennel, a gray pit bull sat pressed against the back wall, body folded inward, eyes dark and watchful. Rex didn't bark. He didn't rush the gate. He didn't show his teeth. He simply watched her, unmoving, as if the world had taught him that stillness was the safest choice left. "Hannah," Rachel called softly. "Come on, honey." Hannah didn't answer. She took a few steps closer, then stopped, well short of the gate. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered herself to the concrete floor, back against the wall opposite Rex's corner. The cold seeped through her jeans. She didn't seem to notice. She didn't look at him directly. She knew better than that. Instead, she hugged her backpack tighter and stared at the floor between them, giving him space, without knowing she was doing it. Rex's muscles tensed. This was new. Children usually moved fast. They squealed. They reached. This one didn't do any of that. She smelled like crayons and laundry soap. She made herself small. Tom saw them from the end of the aisle and froze. He held his breath, ready to intervene. But something stopped him. The dog hadn't reacted. No growl, no trembling escalation, just eyes, locked on the small figure, sitting quietly across from him. Hannah opened her backpack and pulled out a comic book, the pages bent and loved. She began to read out loud, her voice barely more than a whisper. And then the hero said it wasn't about being strong. It was about staying. Rex shifted his weight. It was subtle, a single adjustment. But Tom noticed. He always did. Rachel approached cautiously, anxiety tightening her shoulders. "Sweetheart," she murmured, "that dog isn't safe." Hannah shook her head, without looking up. "He's just scared." Rachel paused. The words landed harder than she expected. "You don't know that." Hannah finally glanced up, just for a second. "I do." Rex took one step forward, then another. He stopped halfway across the kennel, chest low, ears back, as if testing the ground for traps. Hannah kept reading, her voice steady, unafraid, not asking anything of him. For the first time in months, Rex wasn't alone with his fear. Tom felt his throat tighten. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. A connection form. In the quiet space between a dog everyone had written off and a little girl who had learned how to wait. Rachel reached for Hannah's shoulder, then hesitated. Something about the moment made her pull her hand back. After a few minutes, Hannah closed her book and stood. She didn't wave. "Time 100 malmas." She didn't smile. She simply looked at Rex and said, "Bye." Rex didn't follow her to the gate, but he didn't retreat to the corner either. As they walked away, Tom exhaled, for the first time in what felt like minutes. He glanced back at Rex, who remained where he was, eyes fixed on the empty spot where Hannah had sat. Tom whispered to himself, "Well, I'll be damned." Hannah came back the next day. Tom recognized her shoes before he saw her face. Small sneakers with frayed laces, moving slower than most children her age. She walked beside her mother, Rachel, who looked tired, in the particular way that came from working too many late shifts and sleeping too little in between. They didn't stop at the front desk for long. No questions, no forms, just a quiet nod before heading down the same aisle. Rex was already awake. He always was. The shelter was louder than it had been the day before. Dogs barked in uneven bursts. Metal bowls clanged. A radio played softly in the office. Rex felt it all in his bones. His muscles tightened, instinct pushing him back toward the corner he knew so well. Then, he saw her. Hannah stopped in front of Kennel 14, like she'd never left. No hesitation, no surprise. She set her backpack down and sat on the cold concrete again, in the exact same spot, leaving the same careful distance between herself and the gate. Rex's breath caught. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't a passing moment. She was choosing him. Tom stood a few yards away, pretending to wipe down a counter that didn't need cleaning. He watched Rex's posture closely. The dog didn't growl, didn't tremble, the way he usually did when someone lingered. His eyes stayed on Hannah, alert, but not panicked. Rachel hovered, uncertainty written across her face. "Hannah," she said quietly, "we can look at the other dogs too." "I know," Hannah replied. She didn't look up. "I just want to sit." Rachel sighed, torn between fear and something she couldn't name yet. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. Hannah unzipped her backpack and pulled out a small pack of crackers. She didn't offer one. She didn't even look at Rex when she ate. She just sat, swinging her feet slightly, crumbs falling onto the floor. Rex shifted forward, just enough to stretch his legs. The movement was small, but to Tom, it felt enormous. Rex had not crossed that line in months. Not for food, not for coaxing, not for kind words. He was doing it now, without being asked. Hannah noticed, but didn't react. She had learned, somehow, that reacting could ruin fragile things. After a while, she started talking. Not to Rex directly, just out loud. "My school's really big," she said. "The kids are loud. I sit in the back." Rex's ears twitched. "I like quiet better," she went on. "Quiet doesn't surprise you." Rex took another step. Rachel's heart pounded as she watched the dog move closer to the gate. She instinctively pushed off the wall, ready to intervene. But Tom raised a hand slightly, just enough to say, "Wait." Hannah kept talking, about her old house, about how everything felt different now, about how sometimes she wished people would just sit next to her instead of asking questions. Rex reached the middle of the kennel and stopped. He lowered himself slowly, belly brushing the concrete. Head down, but eyes still fixed on her. His tail didn't wag. He wasn't relaxed. But he wasn't hiding either. Tom felt a lump rise in his throat. Rachel whispered, "I've never seen him do that." Tom nodded. "No one has." Hannah finally glanced up, just briefly. Her eyes met Rex's, soft and steady. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just held the look, then turned her gaze back to her hands. That was when Rex did something no one expected. He lay down, not curled tight, not pressed into the corner, just down, in the open. The shelter noise faded into the background. Even the barking seemed to dull, as if the moment demanded quiet. Rachel covered her mouth. Tom felt something crack open in his chest. He'd spent years believing healing had to be fought for, earned through discipline and structure. Watching this, he realized how wrong that was. Sometimes, healing just needed permission. After 10 minutes, Hannah stood and brushed the crumbs from her jeans. "I'll come back," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. Rex lifted his head as she walked away. For the first time since arriving at the shelter, he didn't turn back to the wall. He stayed where he was, staring at the empty space she left behind. Tom exhaled slowly. He didn't say anything. He just wrote a note on Rex's file, in careful, deliberate handwriting. Approached front of kennel. Calm. No growling. Voluntary movement. It wasn't much. But in a place where time was running out, it was everything. When building trust, what matters most? Consistency, gentleness, or giving space? Comment 1, 2, or 3 below. Hannah kept her word. She came back the next afternoon, and the one after that, and the one after that. Sometimes with her mother, sometimes with a neighbor who watched her while Rachel slept off a night shift. She never announced herself. She never rushed. She just appeared at Kennel 14, like a quiet appointment Rex had begun to expect. The shelter learned her schedule before Rex did. By the 4th visit, Tom noticed something different the moment he walked down the aisle. Rex wasn't pressed into the corner anymore. He still stayed low, still guarded his space, but he waited near the middle of the kennel, head lifted, ears tilted forward. Waiting didn't look dramatic. It looked ordinary. And that was the miracle of it. Hannah sat in her usual spot, back against the wall, knees pulled up. Some days she read. Some days she talked. Some days she just sat in silence, tracing patterns in the dust with the toe of her shoe. Rex learned her moods by sound alone, the rhythm of her breathing, the cadence of her voice, and she never reached for him. That was the rule she never needed to be told. Rachel struggled with it at first. Every instinct in her screamed to intervene, to pull Hannah away from the dog with the red tag, to explain danger in careful adult words. But each time she tried, Hannah shook her head gently. "He doesn't like being hurried," she said once, without accusation. Rachel swallowed hard. The truth was, neither did Hannah. By the end of the week, Rex's tail had begun to move, not wag, not yet, but loosen, just slightly, when Hannah's voice drifted toward him. On the 7th day, he stood and walked to the gate while she was there. He didn't press against it. He didn't test the bars. He just stood close enough that she could see the scars along his chest, pale lines beneath gray fur. Hannah stopped talking. She didn't point. She didn't gasp. She just noticed. "That must have hurt," she said quietly. Rex's ears flattened, then lifted again. He didn't retreat. Tom watched from the far end of the aisle, arms folded tight across his chest. He'd stopped pretending to clean. There was no point. Everyone knew where he was whenever Hannah visited. Other volunteers slowed their steps, curiosity giving way to something closer to reverence. "This isn't normal," one of them whispered. "No," Tom replied. "It's rare." Linda came down to see for herself on the 10th day. She stood beside Tom, silent, taking in the scene. The girl, the dog, the distance between them, shrinking. Not by inches, but by understanding. Rex lay near the gate now when Hannah was there, his body angled sideways, instead of coiled tight. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it wasn't fear either. Rachel joined them, arms wrapped around herself. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly. Linda nodded. "He's still a liability." Rachel looked back at Hannah, who was telling Rex about a spelling test she'd failed. "So is my daughter," she said. "Every day." Linda didn't answer right away. Later that afternoon, a family stopped near Kennel 14. A man in a heavy coat read the red tag out loud. "Dangerous dog," he scoffed. "Why do they even keep animals like that around kids?" Rex startled, muscles tensing, a growl rumbling low in his chest. Hannah froze. Rachel moved instinctively, stepping between them. But before anyone could react further, Hannah spoke. "It's okay," she said. Not loud, not commanding, just certain. Rex's growl faded. His body eased back down. He didn't retreat. He didn't escalate. The man shook his head and walked away. Linda felt her breath catch. She'd spent years managing risk. She'd never once seen it dissolve like that. That night, Tom updated Rex's file again. Continued calm behavior during visits with minor. Responds positively to quiet presence. No defensive escalation observed. It still wasn't enough to change policy. Not yet. But something had shifted. Rex no longer waited for fear. He waited for Hannah. And Hannah, whether she knew it or not, was learning that sometimes staying was an act of courage. The countdown hadn't stopped, but for the first time, it had slowed. The shelter was busier than usual that Saturday. A community adoption event brought in families, bundled in winter coats, children tugging at gloved hands, voices bouncing off the concrete walls. Balloons bobbed near the front desk. Someone had brought cookies. The noise level rose in uneven waves, the kind that made Rex's skin tighten before his mind could catch up. Hannah arrived just after noon. She paused at the entrance, taking it all in. The barking, the laughter, the sharp clatter of metal bowls. She hesitated, then kept going, weaving carefully through the aisle until she reached Kennel 14. Rex was already there, standing, not hiding, but visibly tense. His ears flicked back and forth, tracking every sound. Hannah sat down anyway. She didn't read that day. She didn't talk much either. She just sat, hands folded in her lap, breathing slow, on purpose. Rex watched her closely, chest rising and falling too fast at first, then gradually slowing to match her rhythm. For a few minutes, it worked. Then, a man stopped directly in front of the kennel. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a work jacket dusted with drywall and paint. He read the red tag out loud, his voice carrying farther than he probably meant it to. Caution, dangerous dog. Rex flinched. The word hit like a switch. His muscles locked. A low growl rolled up from his chest, sharp and sudden, cutting through the noise of the room. Time 6,000 psalm. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Rachel was at Hannah's side in an instant, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Hannah," she said, reaching for her. The man stepped back. "See?" he said, to no one in particular. "That thing shouldn't be around kids." Rex surged forward, stopping just short of the gate. His teeth flashed, not in attack, but in warning. Raw fear spilling out now that the room was watching. A volunteer hurried over. "Ma'am," she said, "I need you to move your daughter away from the kennel." Tom was already there, one hand raised, voice calm, but firm. "Everyone take a step back," he said. "Give him space." Hannah stood up, slowly. For a split second, Rex panicked. The movement was too sudden, too final. His growl spiked, desperation bleeding through the sound. "It's okay," Hannah said. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She stepped closer to the gate, but not too close, and knelt down again, putting herself at Rex's eye level without staring him down. Her voice stayed steady, even as her hands shook. "I'm still here," she said. "I didn't leave." The growl wavered. Tom held his breath. One wrong move could undo weeks of fragile progress. This was the moment shelters feared. The moment fear tipped into something irreversible. Rex's chest heaved. His eyes darted from Hannah to the crowd, to the man who'd spoken too loudly. He didn't know which danger to prepare for first. Hannah stayed exactly where she was. "You don't have to be brave," she said softly. "You just have to stay." Something in Rex broke, not violently, but quietly. His body sagged. The growl faded into a whine he didn't seem to realize he was making. He backed up 2 steps and sat, head low, eyes still locked on Hannah, like she was the only solid thing in the room. The shelter went silent. The man muttered something under his breath and walked away. The volunteer exhaled shakily. Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth, tears blurring her vision. Linda Harris, who had watched the entire exchange from across the room, felt the ground shift beneath her assumptions. That wasn't luck. That wasn't coincidence. That was connection. Under pressure. Tom crouched slowly beside the kennel, careful not to crowd Rex. "Good boy," he murmured. Not praise, just acknowledgement. Hannah stood and backed away, giving Rex the space he needed to recover. She didn't touch him. She didn't ask for anything. Rachel knelt and wrapped her arms around her daughter, heart pounding. "You scared me," she whispered. "I know," Hannah said. He was scared too. Later, after the crowd thinned and the balloons sagged, Linda called Tom into her office. "That could have gone very differently," she said. "But it didn't," Tom replied. Linda stared at Rex's file on her desk, the red tag still clipped to the corner. "Fear escalates," she said slowly, "but so does trust." Outside the office, Rex lay near the gate again, exhausted, but calm. Hannah sat on the floor across from him, quietly drawing shapes on a scrap of paper. The shelter had seen fear before. What it hadn't seen was a child standing her ground, not to challenge it, but to understand it. And that changed everything. The hallway outside the kennels had always been narrow, but that afternoon, it felt smaller. The adoption event was winding down, families drifting out with paper cups and tired smiles. Volunteers stacked chairs, the shelter slowly returning to its usual rhythm. The noise softened, but the echoes lingered. Footsteps, laughter, the metallic clink of leashes being returned to hooks. Rex lay near the gate of Kennel 14, worn out, but calm. His eyes half closed, his breathing finally steady. Hannah stood up to leave. It was a simple thing, a small shift of weight, a step taken without thinking. Her sneaker caught on the edge of a floor mat, curled up just enough to be dangerous. She stumbled forward, arms flailing, the sound of her backpack hitting the concrete, loud and sudden. The world snapped. The crash echoed down the hallway, sharp and violent. The kind of sound that made Rex's body react before thought could intervene. His head shot up, his muscles coiled. The crowd, what was left of it, froze. Hannah hit the floor hard. She cried out, more from shock than pain, her voice thin and terrified as it bounced off the walls. For a split second, she was small and alone in the middle of a loud, unfamiliar space. Rex exploded out of stillness. He didn't bark. He didn't snarl. He surged to the front of the kennel and planted himself there. Broad, chest squared, body rigid, eyes locked on the movement around Hannah. His presence filled the gate, not with aggression, but with intention. A physical line, drawn between the fallen child and the rest of the world. People stopped mid-step. A volunteer reached out, instinctively, then froze. Rachel rushed forward, heart in her throat, but even she hesitated when she saw Rex standing tall, unmoving, not advancing, not retreating, just holding ground. "Don't," Tom said quietly, stepping beside her. "Look at him." Rex's focus never left Hannah. His body was tense, every muscle ready, but his mouth stayed closed. No teeth, no growl, just a low, steady breath, pushing through his chest, as if he were anchoring himself to the floor. Hannah pushed herself up on her elbows, tears streaking her cheeks. She looked at Rex through the bars. "I'm okay," she said, voice shaking. "I'm okay." The moment stretched, fragile and electric. Then Rex did something no one expected. He sat, not abruptly, not nervously, slowly, deliberately, as if to say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone." The tension in the room broke, like glass. Rachel dropped to her knees and pulled Hannah into her arms, checking her hands, her knees, her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. Time 400, Mum. Over and over. Linda Harris stood a few feet away, her clipboard hanging useless at her side. She'd seen hundreds of incidents, bites, lunges, close calls that ended with reports and hard decisions. This wasn't that. This was a dog making a choice. Tom felt his eyes burn. He'd spent years in environments where protection meant force. What he was watching now was protection without violence, presence instead of power. Rex stayed seated until Hannah was on her feet again. Only then did he back away from the gate, slow and controlled, returning to the center of the kennel instead of retreating to his corner. His job, whatever he believed it had been, was done. The hallway slowly exhaled. Someone whispered, "Did you see that?" Linda finally found her voice. "I did." Later, when the shelter had emptied and the floors were quiet again, Linda replayed the moment in her mind. Policy said one thing, experience said another. She walked down the aisle and stopped in front of Kennel 14. Rex met her eyes, wary but present. "You didn't protect yourself," she murmured. "You protected her." She made a note in his file that night. longer than any she'd written before. Observed protective behavior toward minor without aggression. Maintained control under stress. No attempt to breach enclosure. It wasn't just documentation anymore. It was acknowledgement. For Rex, the world hadn't become safe. But in that moment, time 400 pum, he'd decided Hannah was worth standing up for. And for the first time, the red tag on his kennel felt less like a warning and more like a mistake, waiting to be corrected. The shelter didn't feel the same after that afternoon. Something invisible had shifted, and everyone sensed it. Volunteers spoke more quietly near Kennel 14. People slowed when they passed Rex, not out of fear this time, but curiosity. The red tag was still there, still loud in its warning, but it no longer felt unquestionable. Linda Harris called an emergency staff meeting the next morning. The small conference room smelled of burnt coffee and damp winter coats. Clipboards lay open on the table, Rex's file sitting at the center, like a challenge no one had asked for. But everyone was now forced to face. What happened yesterday was significant, Linda began, folding her hands. But significance doesn't replace policy. Tom leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. Policy exists to prevent harm, he said. Yesterday, Rex prevented it. A volunteer shook her head. He reacted under stress. That could have gone wrong. But it didn't, Tom replied. And that matters. Linda exhaled slowly. She'd spent her career walking the line between heart and liability, between saving animals and keeping the shelter open. A frightened dog can still bite, she said, especially a strong one, especially around kids. Rachel sat at the far end of the table, hands clasped so tightly. Her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't planned to speak. She hadn't even planned to be there. But when Linda had asked her to come in, she'd said yes. Because running away from this conversation felt worse than staying. My daughter isn't reckless, Rachel said quietly. She's careful. She understands him. That's not enough, one of the volunteers said. Understanding doesn't stop accidents. Rachel looked up. Neither does fear. The room fell silent. Linda turned to her. You're asking us to take a risk. Rachel nodded. I know. I've been doing that my whole life. Raising a kid alone. Working nights. Trusting strangers to watch her while I sleep. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. Hannah doesn't ask for much, but she asks for him. Tom watched Linda closely. He could see the conflict playing out behind her eyes. Yesterday had shaken her, not because it was dangerous, but because it contradicted everything she'd been trained to prioritize. He's still not adoptable by standard definitions, Linda said carefully. He's fearful of adults. He shuts down under pressure. Most trauma survivors do, Tom said. Linda shot him a look, then softened. We can't ignore reality. If we approve this and something happens, it won't, Rachel said. Linda held her gaze. You don't know that. Rachel swallowed. No, but I know what happens if you don't give him a chance. She gestured toward the window, where snow drifted down in slow, quiet sheets. You already know how this ends otherwise. The word hung between them again. Euthanasia. The unspoken outcome that solved logistical problems at the cost of a life no one had managed to understand. Linda closed Rex's file. "Here's the truth," she said. "Yesterday changed things, but it didn't erase risk. If we move forward, it has to be with strict conditions." Tom leaned forward. "Name them." "Professional behavioral training," Linda said. "Not optional. Regular evaluations. No unsupervised contact outside structured settings at first. And full transparency. If there's a setback, we reassess." Rachel nodded immediately. "We'll do all of it." Linda studied her for a long moment. "This won't be easy," she said. "He may never be the dog people expect him to be." Rachel's voice was steady now. "Neither am I." That afternoon, Linda walked down the kennel aisle alone. Rex stood when he saw her, alert, but not panicked. He didn't retreat. He didn't advance. He waited. Linda crouched a few feet back, keeping her body turned slightly away, just as she'd been taught. "You put us in a difficult position," she murmured. Rex tilted his head, ears twitching. "But you also showed us something," she continued. "Something we can't unsee." She reached up and peeled the red tag off the gate. Not completely. Just loosened one corner, letting it hang crooked. "Not yet," she said softly. "But soon." When Hannah came by later that day, she noticed it immediately. "The sign's broken," she said. Tom smiled faintly. "Yeah," he replied. "I think it is." Rex lay down near the gate, calm, present, watching Hannah draw circles on the concrete with her finger. Nothing had been decided yet. But for the first time since Rex arrived at the shelter, the conversation wasn't about when he would run out of time. It was about whether he deserved more of it. The paperwork took longer than anyone expected, not because there was more of it, but because every signature carried weight. Each page Rachel turned felt like a quiet test of resolve, the kind that didn't announce itself as bravery until much later. Her hands shook as she filled in her address, her work schedule, her emergency contacts, single parent, night shifts, limited support. None of it worked in her favor on paper. Linda Harris watched from across the desk, reading every line twice. "This isn't a standard adoption," she said carefully. "It's a conditional placement. Foster to adopt. If at any point this becomes unsafe—" "I understand," Rachel said. "We stop." Linda nodded. "And you won't force interaction. Not with Hannah. Not with anyone." "I won't," Rachel replied. "I promise." Tom stood near the door, arms crossed, trying not to look relieved too soon. He'd seen decisions unravel before. He'd seen hope collapse under the weight of reality. But this felt different. Rex waited in his kennel while they talked. He didn't pace, he didn't whine. He stood near the gate, ears forward, eyes fixed on Hannah, who sat on the floor beside Rachel's chair, swinging her legs slowly. She hummed under her breath, the same tune she'd hummed every day that week. Linda finally closed the file. "All right," she said. "We'll proceed." The words landed softly, but their impact echoed. Rachel let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Hannah looked up, times 600 masems, eyes wide. "Does that mean he can come home?" Linda smiled, just a little. "It means we try." They followed protocol, careful, controlled, no shortcuts. Tom clipped the leash to Rex's collar himself, moving slowly, narrating every motion in a calm, steady voice. Rex froze when the leash brushed his neck, old memories flickering through his body like static. His muscles tensed, but he didn't pull away. "You're okay," Tom murmured. "I've got you." Rex swallowed and stood. It was the first time he'd walked out of Kennel 14 without looking back. The hallway felt longer than usual, brighter too. Rex moved cautiously, nails clicking against the tile, every sound magnified. Volunteers stopped what they were doing and watched in silence. No applause, no cheers, just respect. At the exit, Rex hesitated. The door hissed open, letting in a blast of cold air and the unfamiliar scent of snow and exhaust. Rex's body stiffened, uncertainty rippling through him. Hannah stepped forward, not close, not touching, just enough for Rex to see her. "It's okay," she said. "I'm right here." That was enough. Rex took one step, then another. The door closed behind him, with a soft thud that sounded like an ending and a beginning all at once. Outside, the world waited. Rachel loaded the paperwork into her bag, her breath fogging in the cold. "We'll need training," she said. "Professional help." "Yes," Linda replied. "Fear-based behavior requires structure, consistency. We'll connect you with a certified trainer who specializes in trauma cases. Positive reinforcement only. No pressure." Rachel nodded. "Whatever it takes." Linda hesitated, then added, "You might also want to look into pet insurance, just in case." Rachel gave a small, tired smile. "Already did." Rex stood beside the car, uncertain, but grounded. He didn't pull toward it. He didn't resist. He waited, watching Hannah, reading her cues, anchoring himself to her calm. Tom crouched beside him one last time. "You did good," he said quietly. "Remember that." Rex didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He leaned, just slightly, into Tom's space. A goodbye. A thank you. Maybe both. As Rachel opened the car door, Rex paused again. The shelter loomed behind him. Concrete, metal, memory. For months, it had been the only world he knew. Then Hannah climbed into the back seat and patted the spot beside her. Not touching him, just inviting. Rex stepped forward. The door closed. The engine started. As the car pulled away, Linda stood watching from the steps, hands in her coat pockets. She felt the familiar knot of worry tighten in her chest. But beneath it, something else had taken root. Hope. Cautious. Time 3600 Ms. Earned. Some risks were worth taking. The house was quiet, in a way the shelter never had been. No echoing barks, no metal clanging, no footsteps passing without warning. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a clock Rachel hadn't bothered to unpack yet, and the faint whoosh of cars passing on the road outside. For Rex, the silence felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. He stood just inside the doorway, leash still clipped, body rigid, as if the floor might disappear beneath him at any second. Rachel didn't rush him. She'd listened carefully during the handoff, memorizing every instruction, like a checklist for survival. Move slowly. Speak calmly. Let him choose. Don't force comfort. Comfort came later, if it came at all. Hannah slipped out of her shoes and padded into the living room, setting her backpack down by the couch. She didn't look at Rex right away. She sat on the floor, with her back to him, just like she had at the shelter, and pulled out a box of crayons. "This is where I draw," she said casually. Not to Rex exactly, but not to him either. Rex's ears twitched. Rachel set a bowl of water a few feet away from him, then stepped back. "I'll be in the kitchen," she said softly, announcing her movement the way the trainer had taught her. "You're safe." Safe was a word Rex didn't trust yet. He scanned the room, cataloging exits, shadows, corners. The couch looked big enough to hide under. The space beneath the dining table, even better when Rachel disappeared around the corner. His chest tightened. But Hannah was still there, humming quietly as she colored. After a long moment, Rex moved. He didn't walk. He crept. Each step measured, nails clicking softly against the hardwood. He slipped under the table and curled himself tight against the wall, back pressed firm, eyes on everything at once. From the kitchen, Rachel watched through the doorway, holding her breath. Part of her wanted to cry. Part of her wanted to celebrate. Mostly, she wanted to do this right. That first night passed without incident. Rex didn't eat much. He didn't sleep deeply. Every sound, a car door, a neighbor's footsteps, the heat kicking on, made his head snap up. Hannah noticed. She didn't say anything. She left her bedroom door open and slept with the light on, just enough to soften the dark. Sometime after midnight, A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Rex jolted awake. The sound hit him like a memory, sudden and overwhelming. His breath came fast, shallow. He scrambled out from under the table and pressed himself into the corner by the front door, claws scraping softly against the wall as panic took over. Rachel heard him immediately. She came out of her room, heart racing, every muscle screaming to intervene. She stopped herself a few steps away, kneeling instead of approaching. "It's just a storm," she said gently. "You're okay. Time twice thousand." Rex wasn't okay. The thunder cracked again, closer this time. His body shook, a full-body tremor he couldn't control. He let out a sound, half whine, half plea, that cut straight through Rachel's chest before she could think. Hannah appeared in the hallway. She hadn't been called. She hadn't been woken by shouting. She'd just felt it. She walked over and sat on the floor, a few feet from Rex, cross-legged, hands folded in her lap. She didn't touch him. She didn't look at him directly. "I hate storms too," she said quietly. "They don't ask before they get loud." Rex's breathing hitched. The thunder rolled again, closer, louder. Hannah scooted an inch nearer, not toward Rex's face, but toward his side, keeping her body turned slightly away. She rested her shoulder against the wall, offering her presence, without pressure. "I'm right here," she said. Something in Rex gave way. He inched forward, slow and trembling, until his side brushed Hannah's arm. He froze, waiting for pain that didn't come. When it didn't, he leaned just a little more, his weight settling against her, like a question. Hannah stayed still. Rachel covered her mouth with both hands, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. The storm passed eventually. The thunder faded into distance. Rex didn't move away. He stayed there, pressed against Hannah, his breathing gradually slowing to match hers. For the first time since leaving the shelter, he slept. In the morning, the house looked the same. Nothing dramatic had changed. No miracles. No sudden transformations. But Rex ate his breakfast, and when Hannah stood up for school, he followed her to the door. Not close, not touching, just enough to let her know he was there. By the third week, the house had found a rhythm, but Rex had not. Mornings were easier. Light came in through the kitchen window, soft and predictable. Hannah ate cereal at the counter. Rachel drank her coffee standing up, already half gone to her shift in her head. Rex learned where to lie, so he could see both of them at once. He learned the sound of the bus stopping down the block. He learned that the front door opening didn't always mean something bad followed. Nights were different. Nights carried memory. The first training session happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Karen Whitfield, a certified canine behavior specialist, with a calm voice and deliberate movements, arrived with no treats in her pockets. and no clipboard in her hands. She sat on the floor, angled away from Rex, and spoke to Rachel like they were discussing weather. "Trauma lives in the nervous system," she said, "not in obedience." Rex watched her from beneath the dining table, eyes sharp, body ready. Karen didn't look at him. "We're not fixing him," she continued. "We're teaching his body new options." They started small, too small to look like progress to anyone else. Rachel placed Rex's food bowl down and stepped back. Karen timed the distance. Hannah stayed in her room, door open, drawing quietly. Rex approached the bowl, paused, retreated, then returned again. Karen nodded once. "That," she said, "is choice." Progress came in inches, and then unraveled in seconds. Time 1000. A neighbor stopped by unexpectedly one evening. A heavy knock. A deep male voice calling Rachel's name through the door. Rex reacted before anyone could stop it. His body slammed into the corner by the couch, breath tearing out of him, a sharp bark ripping free before he could swallow it back. Rachel froze. Karen had warned them about this, about triggers, about setbacks. "It's okay," Rachel said, though her voice shook. She didn't move toward him. She didn't reach. The knock came again. Rex spiraled. Hannah appeared in the hallway, small hands gripping the hem of her shirt. She stopped when Rachel lifted a hand. Not a command, just a signal. "Give him space," Rachel whispered. Hannah nodded and sat on the floor, back against the wall. She waited. Karen watched carefully. "This is the work," she said quietly. "Not when things go right. When they don't." Rachel asked the neighbor to leave. The house went quiet again, but Rex didn't recover quickly. He paced. He drooled. His eyes stayed wide, scanning for a danger that had already passed. Hours later, long after the lights were dimmed, the storm rolled in. Thunder cracked hard and close, rattling the windows. Rex collapsed. Not figuratively. His legs gave out beneath him, and he pressed himself into the narrow space between Hannah's bed and the wall, shaking so hard the mattress trembled. His breath came in broken gasps. His body remembered. Nights chained to concrete, remembered noise, followed by pain. Time trekked on. Hannah woke up instantly. She didn't call out. She didn't turn on the light. She slid out of bed and sat on the floor, close enough to be felt, but not touched. She wrapped her arms around her knees and rocked slightly, the way she did when she was scared. "I'm here," she said. The thunder boomed again. Rex crawled closer, inch by inch, until his shoulder pressed against her shin. He flinched, waiting for the moment the world punished him for needing something. It didn't. Hannah leaned her head against the wall and stayed still. Minutes passed. Then more. Rex's breathing slowed, not because the storm had stopped, but because his body had found something stronger than memory: presence, predictability. A small human who didn't demand bravery, didn't ask him to be fixed. In the morning, Karen returned. Rachel told her everything: the panic, the barking, the collapse. Karen nodded. "That wasn't failure," she said. "That was honesty." She crouched near Rex, still without touching. "Scars don't disappear," she said. "They change shape." Rex lay beside Hannah, head resting on the edge of her bed, eyes half closed, but alert. "He'll always have limits," Karen continued. "Crowds, strangers, loud men. That's reality. The goal isn't perfection. It's safety and trust." Rachel nodded, absorbing every word. She'd already looked into professional dog training programs, even pet insurance options, preparing for a future that might be complicated and costly. Hannah traced a line along the carpet with her finger. "He's not broken," she said softly. Karen smiled. "No," she replied. "He's healing." Rex lifted his head at the sound of Hannah's voice and shifted closer to her side. Not all the way, just enough.